The blizzard came without warning. One moment, the perimeter sensors showed nothing. The next, a figure materialized from the white to girl, barely 18, moving through the storm like she'd been born inside it. No vehicle, no escort, no radio signal. Just a thin jacket, faded at the elbows, and boots that had seen 3 winters too many. She walked straight toward the gate. The 2 guards on duty exchanged a look. Then one of them laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, swallowed by the wind. She stopped at the barrier, didn't raise her hands, didn't flinch when the rifle swung toward her. She said, very clearly, over the howl of the storm, "Give me a gun." The laughter that followed filled the guardhouse, filled the radio channels, filled the briefing room, 3 corridors deep, where Colonel Harlan Doss set down his coffee and frowned at the monitor. On screen, the girl looked directly into the security camera. Her eyes were the color of a frozen river and just as still. Something in Colonel Doss's chest went quiet. He pressed the intercom. "Bring her in." The checkpoint at Firebase Keller sat 40 miles north of anything with a name on a map. In summer, it was remote. In January, during a Category 3 storm system rolling off the Canadian Rockies, it was the edge of the world. Supply helicopters had been grounded for 36 hours. The satellite link flickered every 20 minutes. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive on roads that no longer existed beneath 3 feet of packed snow. Nobody came to Keller in a blizzard. Nobody walked to Keller at all. Private Garrett Webb had been on gate duty for 4 hours when he saw her. He blinked, rubbed his eyes with one gloved fist, looked again. She was still there. Webb. His partner, Corporal Diane Ostrovsky, had gone very still beside him. "You seeing this?" "Yeah." She walked out of that. Ostrowski gestured toward the wall of white beyond the perimeter fence. Nothing was visible past 50 yards. The storm swallowed everything. Trees, hills, the access road they'd plowed twice that morning. The girl had come from inside it. She was slight, 5'4", maybe, in those worn boots. Dark hair plastered against her cheekbones by the wind. The jacket she wore olive drab. No insignia was soaked through at the shoulders. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers pale at the tips, knuckles raw. No pack, no weapon visible, no radio. Nothing that explained how she'd crossed 40 miles of wilderness in a storm that had grounded every aircraft in the region. She walked like someone who knew exactly where she was going. That was the thing that set Webb's teeth on edge. It wasn't the impossibility of her being there. People did impossible things all the time in his experience, usually through desperation or stupidity, or some combination of both. It was the quality of her movement, measured, deliberate. Each step placed with the economy of someone who had learned long ago that wasted motion was wasted energy, and energy was survival. This was not a girl who had stumbled out of the wilderness. This was a girl who had walked through it on purpose. Webb stepped out of the booth. The cold hit him like a flat palm, even through the layers. Through the insulated gear that cost the taxpayers $400 a unit, the wind found him. He had to raise his voice over it. "Stop right there. Identify yourself." She stopped. Not because she was startled, because she decided to. "My name is Cora Vane." Her voice was steady, controlled in a way that didn't match her appearance. A girl who should be shaking, exhausted, hypothermic. "I need to speak with the commanding officer." Webb looked at Ostrowski. Ostrowski looked at Webb. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this is a restricted military installation. You can't be here. How did you even—" "The access road is impassable," Cora said. "I came through the ridgeline, northeast approach. There's a gap in your sensor grid at bearing 047, approximately 60 meters from marker post 14. You might want to flag that." Silence. The wind screamed between them. Webb had been in the military for 6 years. He had stood guard at 3 different installations across 2 continents. He had dealt with civilian incursions before, confused hunters, conspiracy theorists, the occasional journalist trying their luck. None of them had opened with a detailed assessment of his facility's security vulnerabilities, delivered in the tone of someone reading items off a grocery list. Ostrowski had her hand on her radio before she'd consciously decided to reach for it. "Get the colonel," she said quietly. Her eyes hadn't left the girl. Webb kept his rifle level, kept his eyes on Cora. She wasn't moving, wasn't shivering, which was deeply wrong. The wind chill tonight was pushing -30, and she was wearing a jacket that belonged in a thrift store, not a tundra. Her gaze had drifted to the security camera mounted above the gate, a wide-angle unit, military-grade, positioned to cover the full approach from every angle. She looked at it the way someone looks at an old acquaintance, calm, recognizing. And then, just for a fraction of a second, so brief that Webb would later question whether he'd seen it at all, something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, not relief, calculation. They put her in conference room B. It was not a kind room. Fluorescent light harsh as an interrogation lamp, though it was simply the standard fixture, installed by someone who had never considered ambiance. A steel table, bolted to the floor. Chairs designed for function over comfort, their edges squared and unforgiving. A one-way mirror along the east wall that everyone in the room pretended not to notice, because acknowledging it would acknowledge that this was being recorded, and acknowledging that would change the dynamic in ways that nobody currently wanted to explore. Colonel Harlan Doss sat at the head of the table. He was 53 years old, built compact and solid, with close-cropped gray hair and the face of a man who had spent a career making decisions that couldn't be unmade. He had been commanding Firebase Keller for 8 months, which meant he had spent 8 months in one of the most isolated military installations in North America doing work that did not officially exist. He was good at his job. He was better at reading rooms. This room was telling him something he didn't have a category for. To his left, Captain Renata Scholl's intelligence liaison, 2 tours in Eastern Europe, the kind of compose that came from seeing things she'd never put in a report. Her pen was out. Her notepad was open. She had written nothing yet. To his right, Staff Sergeant Owen Briggs, who ran Keller's Special Operations Detachment and had the build and demeanor of a man who found most situations beneath his concern. He was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. He had not looked at the one-way mirror once. He was looking at the girl. 3 others filled the remaining seats, all armed, all watching. Cora Vane sat across from them. They'd given her a blanket. She'd folded it neatly on the chair beside her and left it there. Someone had put a cup of coffee in front of her. She hadn't touched it, though the steam rising from it was the warmest thing in the room. She sat straight, hands flat on the table. The fluorescent light caught the angles of her face, sharp jaw, dark eyes, a faint scar along the left eyebrow, old and pale, the kind that had been there long enough to become part of a face rather than a mark on it. She looked younger than 18 up close. She also looked considerably older. Both things were true simultaneously, and the contradiction was unsettling in a way that Doss couldn't fully articulate. He studied her for a long moment. She didn't fill the silence, didn't shift in her chair, didn't reach for the coffee or fidget with the buttons on her jacket. She simply waited, with the patience of someone who had learned that rushing things produced worse outcomes. "Miss Vane," Doss said, "you want to explain how you reached this installation?" "I already told your guards. Northeast Ridge. There's a gap in your sensor grid at bearing." "I heard what you told them." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to know why." Cora's eyes moved around the table. Cataloging. She did it without any attempt to hide it. The quick, systematic assessment of every person in the room, starting with Briggs, because he was clearly the physical threat, moving to Scholes because the pen and notepad meant recording, and recording meant risk, ending with the exits, which were 2, the door she'd come through, and a secondary access point behind the one-way mirror. Briggs noticed. His jaw tightened. "I need to see your commanding officer," Cora said. "Your actual commanding officer, not department head, the general." Doss paused. "General Whitmore is not available to—" "Then make him available." She paused. One beat. The precision of it, the timing, the weight she put into the silence before and after was clinical. "Please." Scholes set her pen down. Her voice was even, careful. The voice of someone who had interrogated people across 3 languages and knew exactly how to calibrate pressure. "Young lady, I don't know how you got past our perimeter, and I don't know who sent you here, but you are sitting in a restricted military facility, and you have approximately 30 seconds to start giving us a reason not to put you in a holding cell until this storm clears." Cora looked at her directly. The gaze was steady, not aggressive, not submissive, the gaze of someone meeting an equal. "I understand the position," she said. "I'll give you a reason, She said it simply, without defiance, without nervousness, without the performance of either. The way a person states a fact they've already verified and are now simply communicating. Then she looked back at Doss. "Give me a gun." The silence lasted 1 full second, a real second, dense with the collective processing of everyone in the room. Then Briggs started laughing. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was the involuntary release of tension that comes when something is so far outside expectation that the mind needs an exit valve. A girl, soaking wet, wrapped in the ghost of a jacket, sitting across from 6 armed military personnel in a restricted facility, and she was asking for a weapon. The others around the table followed Briggs's lead. Not mockery exactly, more than nervous, disbelieving laughter of people who had suddenly found themselves inside a situation that didn't have a protocol. Cora didn't react. She waited for it to finish with the same patience she'd shown from the moment she walked through the gate. The laughter ran its course 20 seconds, maybe 30, and then it stopped, one person at a time, as each of them registered that she wasn't going to perform embarrassment for them. Briggs leaned across the table. "Can you even handle a firearm, sweetheart?" The word landed in the room and sat there, condescending, deliberate. He was testing her not for information, but for reaction, for the crack in the composure. Cora's gaze moved to him slowly, just her eyes. Her head didn't turn, the rest of her didn't move. The room's temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. "I don't miss," she said. Briggs opened his mouth. Cora pushed back her left sleeve. The mark was on the inside of her forearm, not a tattoo, not ink, something older, a brand, or a burn, or something that occupied the uncomfortable space between the two, a shape roughly 2 inches across. A talon, stylized, rendered in lines too precise for anything improvised. The geometry of it was deliberate and exact, not the work of someone with a kit and a YouTube tutorial, but of a process, a procedure. The kind of mark that required both intention and specialized equipment and, above everything else, a decision made about a person before that person was old enough to make decisions about anything. The room processed it in stages. Briggs stopped laughing first. His mouth stayed open for a moment, then closed without completing whatever he'd been about to say. His eyes were fixed on the mark. Something had changed in his face, not recognition, but the precursor to recognition. The shape of a thing he'd heard about but never seen. Scholes recognized that something had shifted, that the air in the room had reorganized itself around a new center of gravity, but she didn't yet know what or why. Her eyes went from Cora's arm to Doss's face. Doss had gone very still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of a man confronting something he'd been told did not exist, finding it sitting across a steel table from him in a blizzard, and having to very rapidly restructure his understanding of several things he'd believed to be settled. He said, "Clear the room." Nobody argued. They'd been reading Doss long enough to know when the instruction was non-negotiable. They filed out within 20 seconds. Briggs last, moving slower than the others, his eyes on the mark on Cora's forearm, until the door closed between them and it. The room went quiet. Cora lowered her sleeve. Doss was at the intercom panel before the footsteps in the corridor faded. His voice was controlled, carefully controlled the way a man controls his voice when what his voice wants to do is something different. "I need General Whitmore, now. Conference room B." A pause. "Tell him I need him to come personally. Tell him," he stopped, recalibrated. "Tell him I need him to look at something." Static. Then the voice on the other end said, "What should I tell him? It's regarding Colonel." Doss looked at the mark on Cora's arm, half visible now below the pushed-back sleeve, the talon shape, the precision of the lines. The age of it old enough to have been part of her since before she understood what it meant. "Tell him," Doss said, "that I've found a black talon marker." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "Say that again, Colonel." "You heard me." He clicked off the intercom. Turned around. Cora was watching him. Her expression hadn't changed. Her sleeve was still pushed back. The mark caught the fluorescent light. A small, specific thing in a large, cold room, carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. "You know what it means," she said. Not a question. "I know what it's supposed to mean," Doss said. His voice was careful, precise, the voice of a man measuring each word the way a surgeon measures an incision. I also know that the program it's associated with was officially terminated. Officially, it never existed at all. Most things that matter never officially existed. The door opened 4 minutes later. General Elliot Whitmore was 71 years old. He moved like someone who had carried heavy things for a very long time, and had learned to distribute the weight across the whole body rather than letting it concentrate in one place. Silver hair, close cropped. A face mapped by weather and decision, and the particular kind of aging that comes not from time but from what you do with time. He had eyes the color of winter sky, pale, gray, very clear, the kind that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He'd commanded operations across 3 conflicts that would never appear in any history textbook. He had authorized actions that would never be reviewed by any oversight committee. He had buried secrets so deep that he occasionally forgot where he'd put them. And then, years later, in moments like this one, they surfaced. He stepped into the room. He looked at the mark on Cora Vane's forearm, and something happened to his face that Colonel Doss had never, in 8 months of working for this man, seen happen to it before. The general's hand steady through 30 years of crisis, through boardrooms and bomb sites, and the kinds of rooms where men made decisions that determined who would survive and who would not trembled. Barely. A fractional tremor, controlled before anyone else might notice. But Cora noticed. Whitmore crossed the room and sat down across from her. He moved slowly, not because of age, because he was giving himself time to decide how to approach what he was seeing. "Who sent you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The whisper of a man addressing something he'd mourned. Cora looked at him, steadily, with those gray eyes that did not waver. "No one," she said. "I came on my own." "That's not possible." And yet, she glanced at the door. "Here I am." Whitmore was quiet for a long time. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the facility, a ventilation system cycled on, then off. "You're too young," he said finally. "The program ended before you were." He stopped. Something crossed his face. The reckoning of a man reaching a conclusion he has been resisting for some time, and finding he can no longer resist it without doing something dishonest. "Who are you?" he asked. Different question now. The colonel's question had been operational. This one was something else. Cora looked at him. Then, for the first time since she'd walked through the gate, she pulled her sleeve down, all the way, covering the mark, as if putting it away now that it had served its purpose, as if it was a key, not an identity. "I think," she said, "you already know." Her file didn't exist. Scholes had been running searches for 11 minutes by the time General Whitmore emerged from Conference Room B. 11 minutes. 6 databases. 4 different classification levels. 2 separate identity verification systems. She had run the name through civilian records, through military enrollment, through federal health registries, through school district databases that covered every county in the continental United States. 0 results. Not a record that had been sealed. Not a file marked classified that she lacked the clearance to open. 0. An absence so complete it was itself a kind of information. She typed the name again. Cora Vane. Checked alternate spellings. Vane, Vane, Vane. First name Cora, Cora, Cora. Nothing. Colonel. Scholes caught Doss in the hallway outside Conference Room B. Her voice was low. "There's no record of this girl anywhere. She doesn't exist on paper. Not in any system I can access, and I can access most of them." "I know." "That's not." She stopped herself, started again. "How does a person not exist? Even orphans have files. Even children born in the most remote circumstances have birth records, medical histories, school enrollment." "She grew up in a military care facility," Doss said quietly. He wasn't looking at Scholes. He was looking at the closed door of Conference Room B, one that also doesn't exist on paper. Scholes went still. "The facility was called Outpost Meridian," Doss said. "I only know the name because Whitmore just told me. It operated for approximately 12 years under a black budget allocation that was reclassified twice and finally deleted entirely when the program it supported was shut down." He paused. "The children there weren't educated. They were trained. The distinction matters. Education gives you knowledge and lets you decide what to do with it. Training gives you capability and tells you exactly what it's for." "Children," Scholes said. The word had weight. Orphans, or close enough. Children whose parents had died in operations so classified their identities were scrubbed from every accessible record. Or children whose parents had never appeared in any official record to begin with, because they, too, had been products of the program. He looked at her. Generation producing generation. It was the long-game version of what they started. Scholes was quiet for a moment. What program? Black Talon, Doss said. Inside conference room B, the lighting seemed less harsh now, or maybe Whitmore had simply stopped noticing it. He sat across from Cora and looked at her with the focused attention of a man who has found something he didn't expect to find and is trying to understand what it means. There was a woman, he said. He said it slowly, each word deliberate. A long time ago. She came through the original program, one of the first volunteer cohort, before they started with children. She was the best operative I ever handled. He paused. Precise. Fearless. She could read a tactical situation in the time it took most people to identify that a situation existed. Not analyze, read, like it was text on a page. Pattern recognition so fast it looked like instinct. Another pause. She disappeared on an operation in 2007. We never recovered a body. I spent 2 years trying. Cora was listening without moving. You have her eyes, Whitmore said. The words cost him something to say. I've been told that. Her name was Clara Vane. A breath. Barely audible. Cora's first visible reaction, a small tightening around her jaw, controlled before it could develop into anything fuller. The tightening of someone receiving information they already possess but had not expected to hear spoken aloud by this particular person. I know, she said. You were raised at Meridian. From age 3. Then you know what they tried to make you into. They tried. She met his gaze without flinching. I decided what I was going to be on my own. There's a difference between what someone shapes you for and what you choose to be. Whitmore looked at her for a long time, studying the architecture of her face, the sharp jaw, the discipline in her posture, the specific quality of her stillness, which was not passivity but readiness. The same quality Clara had possessed. The same ability to be present without advertising it, to exist in a room like a change in air pressure felt before seen. Why are you here? He asked. Because they're back, Cora said. The people who shut down Meridian. She said it evenly, without melodrama, the way someone states a fact that is dangerous and real. The people who killed my mother. Before Whitmore could respond, before the next question that was already forming in his expression, the facility's alarm system detonated the silence. Not a drill tone, not a perimeter alert. The deep, rhythmic pulse that every person in Firebase Keller had been trained to recognize and to treat as the one sound that meant everything changed. 3 short blasts. A pause. 3 more. Contact. Hostile force. Active engagement. Cora was already on her feet before the second sequence finished. They came from 2 directions simultaneously. That was the first thing Briggs noted, and it told him everything he needed to know about who he was dealing with. Amateur operations attacked from one direction. They massed force at a single point and pushed through. Experienced teams split and coordinated, because a target that has to defend 2 vectors simultaneously is a target whose attention is divided, and a divided target is a compromised target. These people were experienced. The north perimeter went dark. First sensors cut, not overloaded. The distinction mattered enormously. Overloading sensors required brute force, which left traces. Cutting them required precise knowledge of their placement and their power infrastructure. Somebody had done reconnaissance on Firebase Keller. Extensive, careful, patient reconnaissance. 4 minutes after the first alarm, the casualty report came in from Checkpoint Charlie. 2 guards down, but non-lethally. Neutralized. The precision of it was, in its own way, more alarming than if the guards had been killed. Killing guards was desperation or recklessness. Knocking guards out without killing them was a statement. We could have, and we chose not to. The calculation of professionals with a specific objective and no interest in collateral complications. Briggs had his detachment staged in the main corridor within 90 seconds of the first alarm. 6 operators, fully geared, moving on trained instinct. He was on the radio, directing fire teams with the clipped efficiency that came from a decade of doing exactly this. Outside, the storm was both enemy and terrain. Visibility at 0. Wind shear cutting horizontally across the perimeter, carrying sound unpredictably. His people were good, but good had limits when the battlefield was a whiteout. Drone contact. Operator Reyes called from her position. 3 units, northeast quadrant, small, fast, military grade. Counter drone? Jammed. They're running a suppressor. Broadband. Briggs absorbed this. Counter-drone suppression required specialized equipment. Expensive, sophisticated, the kind of hardware that didn't come through standard channels. He revised his estimate of who he was dealing with upward. Cora appeared in the corridor. She had moved from conference room B to the main corridor in under 40 seconds, which meant she'd gotten past the 2 soldiers stationed at the door without alerting either of them, which meant she was very fast and very quiet, and had been paying very close attention to the position of everything around her from the moment she'd entered the facility. Briggs looked at her. She looked at him. "The generator room," she said. "Seal it now. That's their next target. How would you—" "Listen to me." Her voice was not loud. It was precise. The voice of someone who had learned that volume was less effective than clarity. "Your sensors are gone, which is phase 1. Your communications dropped 4 minutes ago, which is phase 2 partial, not total, because they don't want you calling for extraction yet. They want you managing an internal crisis. Phase 3 is power. Cut your power, and they own your cameras, your interior lighting, your electronic locks." She looked at his operators. "Does your team train in darkness?" Nobody answered. "They do," Cora said. Briggs stepped toward her. "You're a civilian in a live engagement, and you are going back to— Give me a gun." He stared at her. "Outside, a controlled detonation, precise, surgical, the kind you used when you wanted to disable a specific circuit without damaging surrounding infrastructure, knocked the east wing to emergency backup power." The main corridor's lights flickered, steadied, dimmed by 30%. "Phase 2.5, Cora said. "They're ahead of schedule, which means they have inside information about this facility's timeline. Someone mapped this operation from information that was not available from external surveillance alone." Briggs's radio crackled. His operator at the generator room 3 corridors away, south side, was reporting movement in the exterior maintenance shaft. 2 contacts, moving fast, moving like they knew exactly which shaft to use. Briggs looked at Cora. She looked back at him, patient, waiting. He reached for his sidearm. Not to give it to her, to draw it, to be armed and moving, because the situation had clearly advanced past the point where standing still was a viable option. She'd already taken it from his holster. It happened so cleanly that it took him 2 full seconds to register that his hand was now empty, not aggressive, not violent. A movement so economical, so geometrically precise, that it was almost difficult to be angry about. The way a person catches a falling object, the reaction time compressed, the motion complete, before the brain has finished processing the decision to move. She checked the chamber, checked the magazine, safety, balance, each action taking a half second, the sequence of a person so practiced that it was below conscious thought. She handed it back. "I need a rifle," she said, "something with range. The sniper covering your northeast approach is approximately 400 meters out. In a zero visibility whiteout, the effective range of your standard sidearm is 20 meters. I need a rifle." Briggs held a sidearm. She'd returned to him. He looked at it, then at her. 3 full seconds. "Reyes," he said, "give her your M110. She went out the east door alone. Nobody ordered it. Nobody authorized it in the sense that authorization was given and received and documented. She said she needed a shot from outside, and she needed it now, and before anyone could formulate an objection, she was moving toward the door. Briggs didn't stop her. He would spend a long time afterward wondering why, whether it was something she did, some quality in her movement that preempted objection, or whether some part of him had already reached a conclusion about her capabilities that his conscious mind hadn't quite caught up to yet. She checked the wind direction by watching the angle of the snow passing through the exterior light cone, adjusted her grip on the M110, pulled the door open. The storm hit her like a wall. -18 degrees, wind shear cutting horizontally. The snow no longer falling but moving horizontal, sideways, everywhere simultaneously. The exterior lights cast cones of yellow through the blowing white, enough to see the ground directly below, nothing beyond. 5 feet of visibility, 10 at most. Somewhere in that white, 400 meters northeast, was a trained sniper in concealment with a thermal scope and the patience of someone who had done this before. Briggs watched through the exterior camera feed. The image was degraded atmospheric interference, motion artifacts, the camera itself struggling with the conditions, but the feed was still running, and through the gray and white grain, he could see her. She walked to a position roughly 30 meters from the building. Stopped. She did not take cover. Did not crouch behind any of the exterior fixtures, the fuel storage unit, the generator housing, the concrete barriers positioned around the east entrance. She stood in the open, in the middle of the storm, upright, and raised the rifle. Everyone in the corridor who had access to a monitor was watching. "She's standing in the open," Operator Reyes said. The statement carried no judgment, only the flat disbelief of someone watching something that contradicted everything they'd been taught about survival in a contested environment. "She's going to get killed," someone said. Cora lowered herself to one knee. The rifle came up, stock against her shoulder, cheek to the stock, eye at the optic, everything aligned. She was completely still, not the stillness of bracing against the cold or the wind, but the deep, sourced stillness of a person who has found a place inside themselves that external conditions cannot reach. A place where the noise of the world, literal and otherwise, simply does not penetrate. In front of her was a white wall. Beyond it, invisible in every practical sense, was a person. A trained, experienced, lethal person who had chosen a position precisely because it was beyond visual range, beyond what any reasonable assessment of conditions would suggest was a viable shot. "You can't do this," Reyes said to herself, or to Cora, or to the monitor. "You can't take a 400-meter shot in these conditions. The wind alone, the variable drag, the atmospheric density, you'd have to compensate for factors you can't even measure from here." The rifle cracked. One shot, clean, unhurried, the sound swallowed by the wind almost immediately, leaving behind a silence that felt larger than the one before it. The monitor showed nothing for 3 seconds. Then Briggs's radio came alive. The fire team he'd deployed to the northeast perimeter, moving under thermal cover, working blind, was in the field. "Target down," the operator said. There was a pause, the kind that comes from genuine confusion. Single shot. From where did that come from? There's no viable firing position within how did. Briggs had no answer. On the monitor, Cora lowered the rifle, stood up, turned back toward the building with the same economy of movement she'd shown since the moment she arrived. She looked directly at the exterior camera. Then she walked inside. The briefing room was quiet when she entered. Whitmore, Doss, Scholes, Briggs, others, the controlled chaos of the operation continuing around them, but paused in this particular pocket of space, gathered around a monitor, around the fact of what they'd just watched. She handed the rifle back to Reyes. "The sniper was using the water tower on the northeast ridge as a spatial anchor," she said. "In a whiteout, with visibility effectively zero, you lose most navigational reference points. The only thing that stays fixed is large, permanent structure. I calculated his most probable position relative to that anchor, adjusted for the wind pattern consistent at roughly 40 miles per hour out of the northwest tonight, which means a 3 to 4 degree windage correction, and added elevation compensation for the temperature differential affecting the round's behavior in flight." She paused. "The mathematics aren't complicated. It's geometry and physics." Nobody said anything. General Whitmore was looking at her the way a man looks at something that confirms a fear he'd spent a long time hoping was unfounded. "Why het ko a," he said, very quietly. An old habit, a phrase from another time, another language, another life. He caught himself, just like her. Cora looked at him. "This," she said, "is just the beginning." They convened in the deepest room in the facility. No windows. Steel walls that had been specifically designed to defeat electronic eavesdropping, a layer of copper mesh in the construction, the kind of precaution that told you something about what kinds of conversations had been anticipated when the room was built. A conference table that had hosted more classified briefings than most government committees, the surface scratched and marked by years of documents and elbows, and the particular tension of people working through things that couldn't be worked through anywhere else. Whitmore sat at the head, Doss and Scholes on his right, Briggs directly across from Cora, who had set the M110 against her chair like she'd been carrying one her whole life. She had been. Black Talon, Whitmore began, and the words landed in the room with a weight that came from how rarely they'd been spoken aloud. Was authorized in 1989 under a joint intelligence directive that has been expunged from every accessible database. Its stated purpose was the development of operatives capable of performing effectively in environments that would incapacitate conventional assets. Extreme cold, extended isolation, high-noise tactical situations. Environments where the psychological demands alone would break most trained soldiers. He paused. The practical purpose was simpler. The creation of human weapons. Exceptional, specialized, controllable human weapons. Volunteers? Scholes asked. Initially, the first cohort were volunteers, experienced operatives who understood what they were agreeing to. Enhanced conditioning, psychological and physical training protocols that went well beyond standard program parameters. He looked at the table. The results were extraordinary. Too extraordinary. The program's overseers concluded that the volunteer cohort's effectiveness was limited by the conditioning work they'd needed to undo prior experience, prior loyalty structures, prior sense of self. They concluded the optimal subject was one who had never built those structures in the first place. The room was very still. Children, Briggs said. Candidates selected for specific genetic and psychological profiles. Elevated threat processing capacity. Accelerated physical learning curves, naturally suppressed fear response not eliminated, which would have made them reckless, but modulated, controlled. They were trained from the earliest age, Meridian psychologists determined was viable, shaped. They used that word specifically in internal documentation, shaped. Who authorized children? Scholes said. People who decided the threat they were preparing for justified the means. Whitmore's voice was flat. People who had the authority and chose to use it. I was not one of them. I ran handlers. I didn't make policy. A pause. I also didn't object strongly enough, and I have spent considerable time with that. He looked at Cora. The program was officially shut down in 2009, he continued. 17 active subjects at termination. Most were adults reassigned or retired. 3 were children at Outpost Meridian. He stopped. I was told they were relocated, given identities, normal lives. I was told it was handled. It wasn't, Cora said. I know that now. Meridian didn't close, Cora said. The government cut the funding and the official authorization in the paper trail, and the facility went further dark. The funding switched to a private source, a man who had been Black Talon's original program director, and who had never believed the program should end. He believed it should expand. She looked around the table. His name is Hargrove. He's been building a private intelligence infrastructure for 15 years, using Black Talon's methodology and his own resources. The facility where I grew up continued to operate. The training continued. The conditioning continued. A pause. I was there until 4 years ago. You escaped? Doss said. I left, Cora said. The distinction was precise and intentional. There's a difference between escaping and choosing to leave. I left when I had enough information to be useful outside. She met Doss's gaze. And when I understood that Hargrove wasn't building an intelligence program, he was building an army. Private, deniable, exceptional, and completely under his control. What does he want with this facility? Scholes asked. The archive, Whitmore said quietly. Cora nodded. What archive? Doss said. Black Talon's original data, Whitmore said. Every subject profile, every genetic marker catalog, every conditioning protocol, every method, every result, every modification, and its outcome, all of it, preserved on an air-gapped server in this facility because someone made the decision years ago that it was too valuable to destroy. He looked at Cora. With that data, Hargrove could scale. He has the funding, the infrastructure, the operational capacity. The archive is the only thing he's missing. The blueprints. With that archive, Cora said, he doesn't build dozens. He builds hundreds. Over time, thousands. Starting younger than they started with me. More systematic, more controlled. She paused. There is currently a facility in Montana where 6 children between the ages of 4 and 9 are in the early stages of the conditioning program. I know this because I was inside Hargrove's network for 4 years before I walked out into this storm. I know the location, the personnel, the timeline. The room was absolutely silent. You were inside his organization, Scholl said. He recruited me when I was 14, Cora said. He'd been watching me since Meridian. He thought I was his best result, his proof of concept. She looked at her own hands on the table. He was right, and he was completely wrong. The counterattack took 18 minutes to plan and was executed in under 5. Cora and Briggs worked the tactical display with the friction and eventual efficiency of 2 people who had grown up speaking different dialects of the same language. She had the strategic picture Hargrove's playbook, his team's patterns, the specific logic of how they'd been trained to prosecute an operation of this type. Briggs had the facility knowledge, the personnel assessment, the operational detail that only came from being embedded in a place for months. Between them, they built a picture. 2 teams, Cora said, moving markers across the display. The North team is largely done, sensor suppression achieved, 2 of 3 communication objectives complete. They're now in a holding pattern, waiting for the East team to finish with the archive. The East team is here. She pointed to a junction in the maintenance corridor on the facility's eastern side. That corridor accesses the server infrastructure through the climate control junction. Here. Another point. From the junction to the archive server room is approximately 3 minutes at operational pace. Standard extraction protocol involves hardline access to copy the data, which under normal encryption would take 7 to 9 minutes. Hargrove's people have a bypass tool specifically designed for this system, which tells you they've had this operation planned for a long time. With the bypass, call it 4 minutes for extraction. You're saying we have a window, Briggs said. We have exactly the window between when they reach the junction and when extraction completes. If we're not at the junction when they arrive, we're managing the situation after the data is already copied, which is a fundamentally different problem. How do you know about our archive server specifically? The same way they know. Hargrove has been building a file on this facility for years. He had someone with access. She looked at Briggs steadily. Someone past or present. You should think about who. Briggs's jaw tightened. He filed it. Now was not the time. What do we need? 4 people. Quiet. No radio communication. Once we're in the maintenance corridor, they'll be scanning. No flashlights. They're using thermal imaging. And I need the backup power to corridor E7 cut in. She checked the time, 70 seconds. Why 70 seconds? Because their team leader checks in at the 8-minute mark from mission start. And if E7 has power at that point, he'll know the facility is responding more coherently than it should be. He'll accelerate the timeline. She paused. He was trained at Meridian. He thinks operationally the way I do, which means I know how he thinks. Briggs looked at her. Something had shifted in his assessment of her, not in the sudden, dramatic way, but the gradual recalibration of someone who has been wrong and is correcting themselves honestly. Is he better than you? Briggs said. Cora picked up the rifle. He used to be, she said. They found him in corridor E7 already waiting. Or rather, Decker let them find him. He was standing in the dark when the team arrived, tall, mid-20s, built for efficiency over mass. Military posture that had never lost the precision of the training that built it. A face schooled so thoroughly out of expression that the neutrality had become its own expression, calm as a decision already made. His weapon was at his side. He looked at Cora for a long moment. 11, he said. Her designation at Meridian, from the years before they'd permitted names. Not contemptuous, precise, an exact address. Decker, she said. You walked in the front door. Something in his voice that might, in another person, be called amusement. Hargrove said you would. He said if Cora Vane had found a lead to this facility, she would walk directly in and ask them to arm her. He said you'd been thinking about this operation for months. He tilted his head fractionally. He wasn't wrong. He usually isn't. That's what makes him dangerous. You know what you're trying to do tonight is going to make him extremely dangerous, Decker said. To you specifically. He already sent you, Cora said. That's not neutral. Decker's gaze moved briefly to Briggs, to the operators behind him, then back to Cora. His tactical read of the room was instantaneous. She could see him doing it the same rapid cataloging she did, the same sourced in training assessment that was faster than thought. He made both of us, Decker said. You've spent 4 years finding reasons to believe that's not the whole story. I understand that. I've had the same thoughts. A pause. But what you did with that sniper tonight? I chose to use it to protect people, Cora said. You are exactly what he built. The choices you make with it don't change what it is. They change what I am. She looked at him steadily. And what you are. You're standing in a corridor with your weapon at your side, having a conversation, instead of completing a mission. That's a choice, Decker. That's you, not Hargrove. Something moved across his face. Barely visible, but real. Behind Cora, Briggs held his position. He felt, very strongly, that this was not the moment to interject. Project Daughter, Decker said. The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. That's what they called your file, he continued. All the rest of us were designations, numbers, categories, operational codes. Your file had a name, Project Daughter. He paused, because Clara Vane wasn't just a subject profile. She was the proof of concept, the gold standard. Every conditioning protocol, every genetic marker, every capability the program was trying to replicate, she was the embodiment of all of it. When she died, Hargrove kept everything. Her full genetic profile, her complete psychological assessment, her capability benchmarks. He looked at Cora. He didn't just learn from her, he rebuilt her. In the corridor entrance, General Whitmore had followed the team and now stood very still. He had heard. He stood with his hands at his sides and heard it, and something in his face was the face of a man receiving a confirmation he'd already suspected and hoped was wrong. Cora's face hadn't changed. Or rather, it had changed the way the face of a very controlled person changes when something reaches the part of them that control can't fully reach. A tightening at the corners of the eyes. A fractional tightening of the jaw. The marks of something absorbed and contained. She was a real person, Cora said. Her voice was quiet. Whatever they put in a file, whatever they extracted and cataloged and used, she was a real person. She chose what she became. That's mine. What she chose is mine. She also died for it, Decker said. Then she knew the stakes. Cora raised the rifle. Not aimed, just present. A statement. And so do I. Decker looked at the weapon. At her face. At the corridor behind her, where Briggs and his operators waited. Hargrove has 12 people inside this facility, he said. You have 4. The archive. I don't care about the archive, Cora said. He blinked. The first unrehearsed reaction, genuine surprise crossing his face before he could process and file it. Then what? Him, she said. Ending the whole infrastructure, not the archive, not this Operation Hargrove, his network, his facilities. She watched Decker's face. There are children at a facility in Montana right now. Younger than we were. You know this, Decker. You've been there. A long silence. If I give you what you need, Decker said slowly, I need to disappear. Completely. New identity, new location, enough support to stay ahead of the people who will look for me. Done, Whitmore said from the corridor entrance. Everyone turned. The general walked forward into the emergency lighting, his face carrying the weight of everything he'd heard in the last 30 minutes. He looked at Decker for a moment, then at Cora. He said, Your mother chose to serve something larger than herself. Every day, that was her choice. And it was real, and it was hers. He stopped. I want you to know that about her. Cora looked at him. 3 seconds. I know, she said. I've known for a long time. The operation concluded at 0347 hours. Hargrove's 12 operators were contained non-lethally, with 3 exceptions documented carefully by Briggs in language that would survive review. The archive server room was secured. 2 of the North Team's operators were in custody and talking, because Cora had told Briggs exactly how they'd been trained to respond, to capture what they'd been conditioned to protect, and what they'd been permitted to reveal, and knowing that, Scholes extracted usable intelligence within 40 minutes. Decker's network access credentials were transferred to 3 separate encrypted drives, placed in Whitmore's personal custody, with copies transmitted through a channel that Scholes confirmed was clean. By 0400, the storm had begun to lose conviction. By 0430, the first gray light was pressing against the eastern sky, soft, cold, tentative. The light of early morning in the high north, which arrives cautiously, as if it has been somewhere difficult and isn't entirely sure of its welcome. Cora stood outside. She'd gone out through the east door, the same door she'd used hours earlier, the one that opened onto the approach she'd used for the shot. The storm's remains moved around her without commitment, the last of its strength spent. The snow underfoot was deep and undisturbed, except where the night had marked it. Boot prints, the drag marks of containment operations, the small dark point where a round had buried itself in the white. She stood still. Whitmore came out behind her. He had her jacket, the worn olive drab one, dried at some point over a heating vent and held it out. She took it, put it on, straightened the collar with the automatic precision of habit. "You could stay," he said. "There's a legitimate place here for someone with your capabilities. We could build something official, authorization, resources, oversight. You wouldn't have to." "I know." She looked at the tree line to the east, where the light was beginning to separate trees from darkness. "That's not the work right now." "What's the work?" She was quiet for a moment. 6 children in Montana, she said, aged 4 to 9. Facility in a mountain valley that doesn't appear on any civilian map. 12 personnel, 2 of whom are original Meridian trained. The others are contractors, competent but not exceptional. She said it without arrogance. As assessment. "If I go in the next 24 hours, before Hargrove's people know tonight happened, I go in clean. After that, he'll lock the facility down and move the children, and I'll be tracking a moving target with incomplete intelligence." "You can't do that alone," Whitmore said. "I came here alone." She looked at him. "I walked through a Category 3 storm alone. I ran the counter-op tonight effectively alone." A pause. "Alone has its advantages. It's quiet. It doesn't require consensus. And it means if something goes wrong, the consequences fall on me and not on anyone else. If you take military assets." "Hargrove locks it down," Doss said. He'd come outside as well, hands in his jacket pockets, breath visible in the cold. "She's right about that. He has a dead man's mechanism. We confirmed it from one of the operators Scholes turned. Biometric check-in every 6 hours. Miss it, and the facility goes to emergency lockdown protocol." Whitmore looked at Doss. "She's thought this through," Doss said. "Not apologetically, as information." Whitmore turned back to Cora. "What do you need from me?" he said. 4 hours before anything gets reported through official channels. I need to be in the air and in position before the network knows what happened here tonight." She looked at him steadily. "And after that, when I come out with the children, I'll need somewhere to bring them. Somewhere that's real. Somewhere that will give them what Meridian didn't." "I can arrange that," Whitmore said. "I know you can." A pause. "That's partly why I came here." He looked at her. The light was growing slow, patient, the way light always returns after a long night. It caught the edges of her, the dark hair, the worn jacket, the particular quality of stillness that she carried everywhere she went. "And after the children?" he said. Cora looked at the horizon. "Decker gave me Hargrove's full network structure," she said. "Locations, assets, personnel, financial infrastructure. The facility in Montana is one node. There are others. Different countries, different cover organizations, different stages of operational readiness." She paused. "Hargrove isn't the only architect. He has backers, people who funded Black Talon's continuation, who protected it from oversight, who profit from what it produces." Her jaw set. "As long as those people exist, the program exists. The funding changes, the location changes, the methodology adapts, but the program continues." "You're going to dismantle all of it," Whitmore said. "Piece by piece." She turned to look at him. "I'm 18 years old, General. I have time." Whitmore reached into his jacket. He held out a card, matte black, no agency logo, no name. A single 10-digit number, printed in small, clean type. The kind of number that existed precisely because certain situations required contact that didn't create records. She took it, looked at it, slid it into the inside pocket of the jacket, close to her chest. "General," she said. She was quiet for a moment, working up to something. For the first time since she'd walked through the gate, she looked uncertain, not afraid, not weak, but uncertain in the way of someone touching something that matters. "My mother," she said. "When you knew her, was she?" She stopped. "Was she someone? Not an operative, not a subject. not a proof of concept. She looked at him. Was she someone? Whitmore was quiet for a long time. The wind moved the last of the storm's remnants between them, soft, almost gentle, the way hard things end. She was the most someone I ever knew, he said. Clara Vane walked into a room, and the room knew she was there, not because she performed it, but because she was genuinely present in a way most people aren't. She laughed at things that were actually funny, and didn't laugh at things that weren't. She argued when she thought she was right, and admitted it when she wasn't. He paused. She was afraid of loud music, and not afraid of anything that should actually frighten a person. She kept a terrible notebook full of words in languages she was trying to learn, most of them wrong, none of it discouraging her. Another pause. She was someone. Completely. Cora was very still. Then she nodded. Once. She turned and walked toward the tree line. Briggs had come outside. He stood at Whitmore's shoulder, watching her go. The two of them, the old general and the combat-seasoned sergeant, watched a girl who was 18 years old walk through the deep snow toward a tree line. In the early morning of a winter day, carrying nothing visible and everything invisible. She's going to do it, Briggs said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Whitmore said. And after Montana? After Montana, there's more. Whitmore watched her. There's always more. Is she enough? Whitmore thought about Clara Vane, who had been afraid of loud music and unafraid of the dark, who had kept a notebook full of wrong words and languages she was learning anyway. She's exactly enough, he said. At the tree line, Cora stopped. She turned back, not toward the people watching, but toward the sky. The east was fully light now, the storm gone entirely, the air crystalline and cold and clean. The light lay across the snow in long, even lines, the kind of morning that follows the hardest nights. She pulled back her left sleeve. The black Talon mark on her forearm caught the morning light. She looked at it for a moment, this thing they had put on her, this symbol of what they had intended her to be. She looked at it the way you look at something you have decided to keep on your own terms. Then she walked into the trees. The forest closed behind her. The snow, what remained of the storm, drifted soft and final across her footprints, covering them, white over white, until there was nothing left to mark where she had been. The archive sat in its sealed room, containing everything they had learned about making a human being into a weapon. It could not contain what happened when the weapon decided for itself what it was for. She'd been built from grief and ambition and science, and the long, cold patience of men who thought they could engineer the soul. They'd been right about most of it. They'd been wrong about the part that mattered. And somewhere north of Firebase Keller, moving through the first clean morning after the storm, a girl who didn't exist in any file on Earth was already calculating the distance to Montana. 6 children, 4 to 9 years old. Designations instead of names. They didn't know yet that someone was coming. She had already decided what she would tell them when she arrived. Your name is yours. It always was.